In my past life, my father, the emperor, summoned me back from the common people, and the false princess voluntarily asked to leave the palace. I married General Xiaoxiao in her place. He treated me like a treasure until the false princess's poison took effect. He forced his way into the palace and killed my father, then drugged me and imprisoned me. To save the false princess, Xiaoxiao raised a goo, a poisonous insect, in my body, taking my heart's blood every day. Before I died, I had become as thin as paper. When I opened my eyes again, I returned to the moment when my father was about to arrange my marriage, pointing to the Prince of Wugua, who would one day become emperor, standing in the corner. Can I marry him? Not far away, Xiaoxiao's eyes were red, and he crushed the wine cup in his hand. When Xiaoxiao pressed down on my fingers and ground them under his foot, I couldn't help but let out a soft groan, but in his cold eyes, there was a deep disgust for me. Look at you now. You no longer resemble the lofty Princess Ninglu. You're even more disgusting than a beggar on the street. My body had been tortured beyond recognition. My chest was stained with blood, and I lay weakly on the ground. I silently endured, too exhausted to respond. Ling Songning, who was standing by his side, approached and swiped her hand across my face. Her sharp nails pierced my flesh. It's all your fault, insisting on coming back to compete with me. You caused me to be sent out of the palace, and you separated me from Xie Lang. Ling Songning, who had spent years in the palace, was actually the daughter of a common farmer. But I was the true princess who had fallen into the common people's hands. 3 years ago, I was found and brought back. Ling Songning asked my father for permission to leave the palace. Now, with a determined smile, she rested softly in Xie Zhao's embrace. Well, it's fine. Xie Lang says that if I take your blood for 3 more days, I'll be healed. When the coronation comes, once Xie Lang becomes emperor, I'll be the highest queen in the world. I bit my lip tightly, but the pain felt like a sharp knife stabbing deep into my heart, a pain that stirred my thoughts into chaos. A month ago, Xiaoxiao drugged me and knocked me unconscious. He led the army back to the capital, stormed the palace, and killed my father, forcing the ministers to support him as emperor. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was my father's cold, lifeless body, his eyes wide open in death. Xiaoxiao married me, but it was all part of a plot between him and Ling Songning. Ling Songning had been poisoned by the concubines in the palace when she was young, and the poison would kill her on her 18th birthday. He knew I had a constitution that was most suitable for raising goo, so he designed to plant a human fish goo inside me, using my body to raise it for 3 years. My heart's blood could detoxify her. All these years, he hid Ling Songning in his mansion, searching for famous doctors and expensive herbs to suppress the poison. Until it completely took effect, Xiaoxiao led a rebellion, imprisoned me, and took my heart's blood every day to help Ling Songning. He held Ling Songning tightly at his side, his eyes filled with love for her. I twisted in pain, struggling to support myself, and mocked. Too bad you won't live to see that day. Before I finished speaking, Xiaoxiao kicked me away, and my back slammed into a chair, making me fall to the ground. I couldn't help but cough heavily, blood staining my lips. Her face turned pale, and Xiaoxiao immediately released her, rushing to kneel beside me and tightening his grip on my neck, his gaze fierce, his face twisted in anger. If you say one more word, I'll cut out your tongue. If anything happens to her, the Ling family will be buried with you. I collapsed weakly to the ground, but I smiled as I watched Ling Songning spit out a large amount of dark red blood before losing consciousness. Seeing this, Xiaoxiao hurriedly sent someone to take her back to her chambers, then expertly took out a dagger and cut into my skin, inserting a bamboo tube to draw my heart's blood. But he didn't know, my blood now couldn't save anyone. It would only bring death. I quietly lay still, not resisting. Xiaoxiao held the bamboo tube, his eyes flashing with a dark gleam, but his concern for Ling Songning was clearer than ever. I vaguely remember questioning him when I first woke up, asking why he loved Ling Songning yet still married me, and I saw in his eyes an icy coldness. He accused me of not accepting her, of forcing her to leave the palace, of sending people to harm and assassinate her. If it weren't for my interference, the two of them would have married on the first snow. He accused me of taking her belongings, of her leaving the palace without money for medicine, nearly dying from the poison. He screamed in hysteria, and I realized the man before me was someone I barely recognized anymore. But I clearly remember that Xie Xiao was so kind to me in the past. The first time I met Xie Xiao was on the road to the capital. When I was about to die from an assassination, Xie Xiao appeared. He kicked away the assassin's falling sword and saved me like a hero. "Don't be afraid. You're safe now." I still remember opening my eyes in fear and seeing his clear, brave gaze, my heart racing. Later, when my father wanted to arrange a marriage for me, he volunteered to marry me. He gave up his military command and became a prince consort without real power, once a general leading millions of troops. I felt guilty, but he held my hand, and in his eyes, I saw only me. He earnestly said, "For you, I am willing." Later, war broke out on the border, and no one was more suited to lead the troops than him. I begged my father to restore his military command, to go to battle with him. The border was harsh, the food was bad, but he always found ways to save me warm meat dishes while he ate dry steamed buns. When I was captured by the enemy and taken deep into their camp, he was beaten half to death trying to rescue me, but still used his last strength to wipe the tears from my eyes. "I'm not hurt, don't cry. You will look pretty if you cry. I like seeing you smile." He treated me like a treasure, and everyone knew it. But it turns out, everything he did for me was to save Ling Songning. It was all a facade, created to win the hearts of the people and seize military power, using my love as a pawn. At this moment, when Xie Xiao couldn't extract the blood, he drove the bamboo tube a bit deeper into my chest, his movements cold and indifferent, showing no trace of the tenderness he once had for me. A sense of hopelessness filled my heart, and I welcomed the bamboo tube, letting it pierce through my heart. In the midst of Xie Xiao's horrified gaze, I gathered all my strength to grab the bowl and splash its contents onto his face, the blood flowing from my mouth and dripping down into his. Panicked, he pulled out the bamboo tube and pressed down hard on my chest. Xie Xiao's face turned pale instantly, his eyes full of urgency, and the words he spoke seemed to gnash through his teeth, each word punctuated with anger. "Lin Jiao, how dare you do this?" My body trembled violently, each breath a painful struggle. But I forced myself to pull up the corners of my mouth, managing a bitter smile. "Xie Xiao, you fool. If there's a next life, I'll never marry you again. You." He was so easily deceived by Ling Songning, without even questioning whether her words were true or not. He didn't deserve my love, and he definitely wasn't fit to be an emperor. Since he betrayed me, then we'll die together. No one knew that I was skilled in poison. The mermaid poison was something I had accidentally created. It was colorless, tasteless, and incurable. What people didn't know was that the blood of someone who had been poisoned by it would be lethal, not a cure. Ling Songning had taken my poisonous blood yesterday, and she would die within 3 days. As for Xie Xiao, he wouldn't last a week. Feeling my life slip away, I curled up, struggling to avoid Xie Xiao's touch, but I could no longer move, and all I could do was close my eyes in despair. But when I opened my eyes again, I found myself kneeling in the palace, wearing patched clothes. Beside me, Ling Songning, dressed in luxurious princess attire, was also kneeling. Her voice was soft and tearful as she spoke. "Father, Your Majesty, as I am of commoner descent, I humbly request Your Majesty's permission to leave the palace and return everything to its rightful place." My body shook, and I felt dizzy. I had been reborn. I had returned to the moment when I was just brought back from the common folk to recognize my family. Now, Ling Songning was acting as she did in the previous life, pretending to return the princess title to me, asking to leave the palace in front of the throne. Father was sitting silently on the dragon throne, frowning and saying nothing. The hall was quiet, so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Ling Songning carefully turned her head slightly toward me, her eyes glistening with tears, full of pleading. I knew she was waiting for me. She was waiting for me to plead for her, so she could stay in the palace. In my previous life, I couldn't bear it and did just that. But the royal family values bloodline above all else, and my plea displeased father. After I returned to the palace, I didn't see him for months. He had arranged for a governess to oversee my conduct and had me criticized by the censor because I grew up outside the palace and didn't understand proper etiquette. The most laughable thing was that I had pleaded for her. Yet, she resolutely wanted to leave the palace, claiming she didn't want to occupy what wasn't hers. She was praised by officials and the people for being worthy of her royal upbringing, able to take and let go with ease. This time, I just knelt quietly in front of the throne. Granted. I heard father's voice, agreeing to her request to leave the palace within half a month. I regained my identity as Princess Ninglu of the Ling Kingdom. Once everything was settled, the feast began. Today was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Ling Songning sat beside me, her eyes full of venom, as if she wanted to kill me. I ignored her and looked ahead, but by chance, I caught sight of Xie Xiao across from me. At that moment, he had a deep red scar on his face. I heard he had been ambushed by an assassin during an expedition to suppress mountain bandits, suffering serious injuries and falling unconscious for a day and a night. When he woke up this morning, he struggled to get up and came to the palace for the banquet. His eyes were red, and his gaze fixed on me, filled with what seemed like deep affection, as though we had been apart for a long time. I quickly turned my gaze away, but involuntarily looked at the person in white sitting in the corner. It was Dan Yanche, the prince of the Wu Kingdom, who had been sent to the Ling Kingdom's palace 10 years ago. After returning to his own country, he had swept away all obstacles and became emperor in less than half a year. He was holding a wine cup with one hand, and perhaps sensing my gaze, his eyes flashed with a cold gleam, though in the next moment, he seemed as though he wasn't involved in anything. Halfway through the banquet, father casually mentioned that he would arrange a marriage for me. He smiled and told the officials to recommend talented young men for me. Upon hearing this, Xie Xiao seemed to relax, adjusting his clothes to step forward. But I quickly got ahead of him and pointed to Dan Yanche, sitting at the table. Father, may I marry him? When the flowers bloom on the road, I believe the prince and I are a match made in heaven. Dan Yanche paused, his hand still gripping the wine cup. He met my gaze, smiling in a manner both playful and ruthless. Flowers blooming on the road was a secret code used by Dan Yanche and his supporters, indicating that the Wu Kingdom was almost under his control and would slowly return to him. Rumors said Dan Yanche was ruthless, treating human lives like grass, and though he was a prince, no one dared to bully him in the Ling Kingdom because those who tried to do so disappeared without a trace. If one could ally with him, not only would they avoid Xie Xiao, but perhaps the fall of the Ling Kingdom could be avoided as well. Father, sitting on the dragon throne, relaxed his posture, resting one hand on his forehead, and smiled faintly. That depends on Xiao Che's intentions. I can't make the decision alone. Dan Yanche had come to the Ling Kingdom alone when he was 10 and had stayed in the royal palace for 10 years. Father treated him like his own son. I looked at him, feeling uneasy. Dan Yanche remained silent for a long time, then finally smiled slightly. I am grateful for the princess's favor. I will treat the princess with sincerity in the future, and we will harmonize like the music of the guqin. It was exactly as I wished, but I heard a hint of threat in his words. So, my marriage to Dan Yanche was arranged, just waiting for the divination to set an auspicious date for the wedding. Not far away, Xie Xiao's eyes were red, his body swaying. He crushed the wine cup in his hand, attracting everyone's attention. What's wrong with General Xie? Has his injury flared up? Someone, call the royal doctor. Xie Xiao was one of father's fiercest generals, and when they saw blood oozing from his wound, they looked worried. Xie Xiao stiffly forced out an ugly smile. It's nothing, Your Majesty. Please don't worry. I'm just overjoyed for Princess Ninglu. Not only has she found her family, but now she's found a good match. His gaze toward me flickered with deep reluctance, but it quickly disappeared. He bowed, holding his chest, and returned to his seat. I overheard some court officials whispering. After General Xia was stabbed, why does he seem less spirited than before? His injury hasn't fully healed, right? I heard the assassin was sent by the Wu Kingdom to spy on military affairs. After injuring General Xia, he escaped, and they still haven't caught him. Honestly, General Xia must be worried. His Xia family army is so skilled in battle. With him leading them, what other country would dare to challenge him? A chill ran down my spine. That's right, Xia Xiao had the Xia family army. He also held the Tiger Seal, which gave him command over 1,000 troops. Now that he had lost his position as a prince consort, I had to figure out a way to take away his military power. The banquet over, I returned to my chambers, which had already been cleaned by the palace servants. Ling Songning had already moved out. I heard that she had persuaded the 13th princess, who was friendly with her, to move into her side palace, likely hoping to make some feudal struggle. Father had sent a tutor to teach me etiquette. With the experience from my past life, I easily earned her praise. In less than 3 days, the tutor reported back to father, saying my manners were perfect and that there was nothing more for her to teach. Father happily rewarded me with many jewels and even said I could go to the Imperial Academy like other princes and princesses. The very academy I hadn't been allowed to enter in my past life. But, to my surprise, I met Ling Songning at the academy. In Ling country, the children of officials ranked 3rd and above could attend the Imperial Academy alongside princes and princesses. Though Ling Songning had lost her title as princess, she was still allowed to study at the academy for another half-year. Currently, she was surrounded by several beautifully dressed and outstanding-looking women, making her, clad in white, seem fragile and pitiful, like a little white flower. I scanned the room and unexpectedly noticed Xia Xiao resting at a table not far from me, leaning on one hand. I frowned and moved to a more distant, empty spot. Around me, whispers started. Who is she? So bold, daring to sit in Prince Yan's seat. Don't you know? That's the Ningla princess, who was found among the commoners. A few days ago, she boldly claimed in the palace to have Ling Songning kicked out. I heard the emperor has already betrothed her to Prince Yan, and she was the one who asked for it. Truly shameless. In my past life, I had stayed in the palace for several months, trying to make connections with noble women, only to discover that my reputation had already been tarnished. Looking back, it was Ling Songning who had sowed discord. The murmurs woke Xia Xiao from his slumber. Seeing me, he flashed a faint smile, casually waving his sleeve and patting the table beside him. Xiao, this spot is still empty. I saved it for you. There was a hint of expectation in his eyes. I ignored him, lowered my gaze, quietly returned the paper and pen I had taken out to their holder, but inside, a storm of emotions surged. In my past life, just before I married Xia Xiao, he always addressed me as princess, never by my name, claiming it was against royal protocol. Only after marriage, with much persistence on my part, did he begin to call me Xiao. But in this life, Xia Xiao, you too have been reborn. Ling Songning, seeing Xia Xiao's enthusiastic attention, turned and glared at me with an expression full of malice. The embroidered handkerchief in her hand seemed ready to tear apart. I was about to speak when Dan Yanche entered, walking into the room, bathed in the morning sunlight. Still in his white robes, he appeared like a deity. But when he saw me, a subtle look of surprise flashed across his face. After putting away my paper and pen, I ignored the malicious stares from the others and stood up, making room. Apologies, I didn't know this was your seat. He surveyed the onlookers and, in a slightly raised, cold voice that left no room for argument, said, So, what if it's not yours? If you want it, take it. With that, he gave me a look I couldn't understand, a very serious glance. Then he walked over to the desk behind me, flicked his sleeve, and sat down with an indifferent air. The surrounding people dared not speak again. Xia Xiao, seeing me return to my original seat, made no move to take the spot beside him. He gave a bitter laugh and clenched his fists, seeming to want to speak but holding back. He was about to approach when a cough interrupted him. The venerable Zhao Taifu entered, holding a few sheets of paper, and calmly stepped into the room. Everyone has now been learning arithmetic for some time. Today, I have an interesting problem to discuss with you all. As everyone sat down, the Taifu spread the papers out. I followed the other's gaze to look at the problem. An old woman buys chickens in the market. A rooster costs 5, a hen costs 3, and 3 chicks cost 1. The old woman wants to buy 100 chickens for 100 coins. How many roosters, hens, and chicks can she buy? The students began whispering, pulling out paper and pens to solve the problem. An incense stick later, the Taifu, stroking his beard, smiled and looked at the students below him, asking for the result. Most of the people were deep in thought, scratching their heads. Xia Xiao furrowed his brows, but his hands remained still. I knew him too well. Though he was skilled in strategy, he had little patience for managing household matters and wasn't good at arithmetic either. Dan Yen-che, on the other hand, seemed distracted by something outside the window. After briefly glancing at the problem, he seemed uninterested and looked out the window. The crowd hesitated, but the answers they provided were all wrong. Only Ling Songning stood up confidently. I believe it's the chicken rooster, chicken hen, and chicken chicks. Her assertive words immediately caused everyone in the academy to burst into laughter. I scoffed. Indeed, spending 100 coins would leave 2 chickens missing. Ling Songning, hearing the laughter, quickly realized her mistake and blushed with embarrassment. Her eyes, slightly red, looked at Xia Xiao with a pitiful gaze. Xia Xiao, upon seeing her, slammed his palm on the desk. His voice was a little angry as he spoke. If no one can calculate the correct answer, why laugh at those who are just a few steps behind? His gaze toward Ling Songning showed his concern for her. He still defended her like this. For a moment, the academy was quiet. The old tutor smiled and tried to diffuse the tension. Looks like everyone needs some improvement in their arithmetic. Let me. Before he could finish, Ling Songning interrupted him. Master tutor, since we are all discussing this together, why not let Ling Jiao participate as well? The young ladies who were friendly with her echoed. That's right. As a princess, such simple arithmetic should be nothing for her. Ling Songning's face darkened when she heard the word princess. The next moment, her gaze turned provocative as she looked at me. I coldly sneered inside. Although I grew up among common folk, eating meals from different households, it didn't mean I was foolish. To buy the chicken rooster, chicken hen, and chicken chicks, I stated. The crowd started calculating on their paper or thinking quietly to themselves. To my surprise, it's correct. So impressive. Some people were astonished, others envious, but Ling Songning didn't believe it. She stomped her feet in frustration. Impossible. A commoner like her must be a lucky guess. Realizing the disrespect in her words, she quickly shut her mouth. But I still saw the old tutor's disappointment in her. I smiled lightly, continuing. Or the chicken rooster, chicken hen, and chicken chicks, or the chicken rooster, chicken hen, and chicken chicks. The crowd continued to calculate. Everything is correct. All 100 coins for 100 chickens. As expected of the royal bloodline. Even if raised among common folk, you still have extraordinary talent. This calculation wasn't difficult at all. The chicken rooster was worth 5 coins, the chicken chick worth 3 coins, the total chicken count was 53, and the total cost was 100 coins. If you bought fewer hen chickens, you could still get the rooster and chicks. With just one set of answers, other solutions could be derived. I met the old tutor's gaze, which was both kind and strict, and saw his admiration for me. Ling Songning silently glared at me. If looks could kill, she would have eagerly wished to tear me apart. I smiled lightly, with coldness in my eyes, and returned her gaze. Ling Songning, this is just the beginning. After the class ended, Dan Yanchen said nothing and left with his steps heavy. I was about to follow him when, as I passed a fake mountain, Xia Xiao suddenly pulled me over. His grip on my wrist was painful, and he trapped me behind the fake mountain, his eyes filled with intense and burning emotions. Xiao, you're fine, that's good. I thought I'd never see you again. He made a move as if to hug me. I extended my hand to push him away, stepping back a little. I suppressed my hatred for him and spoke calmly. General Xia, I am grateful for your life-saving grace. But we've only met briefly. You should call me Princess Ningle. Besides, I'm already betrothed. If anyone hears this, it will damage both your and my reputation. Upon hearing this, his eyes darkened, but his words were stubborn, almost obsessive. It's not like that. It shouldn't be like that. You can't marry Dan Yanchen. He's just a discarded hostage. What qualifies him to have you? I met his gaze and replied seriously. Then what should it be like? As a princess, I must marry. Since I like him, of course, I want to marry him. Xia Zhao's body shook slightly, and he instinctively took a step back. He muttered to himself, "You like me, you want to marry me. You like to listen to plays and joke with me. You said you'd be with me for eternity. You even took a knife for me." My anger surged inside. I clenched my hands under my sleeves, fighting not to reveal my murderous intent. In my previous life, I gave my all for him, filled with nothing but thoughts of him, and in the end, I received death and the destruction of my family. Now, reborn, he still wanted me to love him like I did before. When have I ever done such foolish things with you? I hope General Xia does not fantasize any further. Otherwise, I'll report to Father Emperor and accuse you of dishonoring the royal family. Besides, I have never admired you. But Xia Zhao seemed to lose his mind. He pulled me into his arms tightly, frantically trying to explain. This is not fantasy. It's all real. You're already my wife. Let's go to the emperor and have him grant us marriage. Dan Yanchen doesn't deserve to marry you. I struggled, realizing I couldn't break free. I opened my mouth and bit his shoulder, kicking him hard between the legs. Xia Zhao cried out in pain and finally let go of me. I stepped back, raising my hand, and with all my strength, slapped him across the face. If you dare ruin my engagement with Dan Yanchen, I will not let you off. I ignored his bloodshot eyes and picked up a book from the ground, walking away quickly. Behind me, I heard Xia Zhao's insane laughter, like a venomous snake slithering into my bones. What is Dan Yanchen to me? He thinks he can make me give you up? There's nothing I can't have in this world. I paused for a moment, but didn't turn around. I hurriedly walked away, but as I turned the corner, I glimpsed the white corner of a robe. When I reached the corner, no one was there. It was as if the sight was nothing but a hallucination. The next few days were peaceful and uneventful. I visited Dan Yanchao's quarters several times, but was always told that he was either not there or resting and unavailable to meet. Since the encounter at the academy, I hadn't seen him again. On this day, I finally learned that he had been summoned by the emperor. I stationed myself in the imperial garden, waiting along the path he would take back to his quarters. Unfortunately, I ran into Ling Songning. There was only one day left before her departure from the palace, yet she had decided to linger until the very last moment. She sneakily approached behind me and, when I wasn't paying attention, jumped straight into the lotus pond in the imperial garden, splashing and crying for help. Her cries attracted the 6-year-old young prince, who waddled over, holding a newly hatched chick, still covered in down, and ordered people to rescue Ling Songning, who was pretending to be on the verge of death, offering her profuse thanks. I am deeply grateful for His Highness the young prince's life-saving grace. Please do not blame Princess Ninglu. Shivering from the cold, she continued to sob. Although she accidentally pushed me into the pond when I couldn't swim, I have enjoyed the royal affection and wealth for so many years. It's only right for her to want me dead. The naive and innocent little prince puffed his cheeks and asked in his childish voice, "Who are you? Why did you push the princess into the pond?" I turned to look at Ling Songning, who was pretending to be weak. Slowly, I helped her up, and as her eyes widened in shock, I kicked her back into the water. As she splashed and choked in the water, I coldly ordered that no one was allowed to rescue her. Turning around, I found the young prince still staring at us in astonishment. I squatted down in front of him, gently spoke. "She isn't your princess." "I am. She's just playing a game. She'll come out of the water on her own soon." I looked at the chick in his hand. Where did this bird come from? Do you want to keep it? The young prince, distracted, lovingly stroked the chick. I want to return it to its nest in the tree. Hearing that the chick had been rescued from beneath the tree, I quickly added, "This is a magpie's baby. It was perfectly fine in its nest, but why did it hatch on the ground? Because a bad bird, like a dove, put its own chicks in the magpie's nest, and the dove pushed the magpie's chicks out. If it weren't for you, the magpie baby would have starved or frozen to death. That person in the pond is like the dove's chick, pushing me out of my home and making me suffer. Now you're showing kindness to the bird and want to return it to its nest. Since I've finally returned, don't you think you should show some kindness to me too?" The young prince's expression shifted from curiosity to pity. He gently touched my head with one hand while still holding the chick with the other. His eyes even had a slight sheen of tears. I'll recognize you as my princess, and you can help me put this bird back in its nest." Seeing that he agreed, I nodded, and he turned his attention back to Ling Songning, who had finally swum to the shore, mere steps away from it. Her movements were clearly not the act of someone who couldn't swim. She shakily climbed out of the water, but as she approached the young prince, she dramatically collapsed on the ground in a pitiful fashion, reaching out for his help. But the deceived young prince, now angry, pointed at her. "You can swim. You're lying just like the bad bird. Go back to where you came from. The palace doesn't welcome you." He grabbed my hand and tried to leave. I gently patted his hand and reassured him before walking over to Ling Songning. I squatted down next to her and whispered into her ear, "I hate when people slander me and falsely accuse me of things." I smiled coldly as I locked eyes with her. "If I hear rumors that I sent people to assassinate you or humiliate you, I will make sure you understand that those are not just rumors, just like today." Ling Songning froze, her malicious gaze dropping to the ground. The young prince, not waiting any longer, hurried over and pulled me along towards the tree. I had no choice but to follow him. But after walking a few steps, I caught sight of Dan Yanchao standing not far away, his lips curved into a faint smile. I wanted to approach him but was led by the young prince in the opposite direction. "Later, I'll be below. You go climb the tree and put the bird back in its nest." I had no choice but to comply, though in the wind, I seemed to hear his voice, tinged with some affection. "Sweet words. Your ability to coax children has improved since we last met." Ling Songning eventually left the palace. She quietly moved into Xie Zhao's general's mansion, just like in the previous life. But within 3 days, she left the city with Xie Zhao in an inconspicuous carriage, taking the back gate. I followed them with my hidden guards. They went to the Handan temple outside the city and entered a secluded meditation room. I waited a while before Ling Songning and a maid dressed in Wugua clothing came out. Once I confirmed they wouldn't be returning soon, I hid beneath the window outside the meditation room. Inside, Xie Zhao was sitting with Wugua's crown prince, Dan Yunqi. According to the schedule, Dan Yunqi was supposed to arrive in the capital in 3 days, yet he had come much earlier. Dan Yunqi finished his tea in one gulp and gently placed the cup on the table. I didn't expect that I would have the chance to sit down with General Xie and talk about cooperation. "So, what does General Xie want?" Xie Zhao calmly spoke about the cooperation, but my heart grew colder as I listened. Ling country had been at peace for 3 years. Xie Zhao only commanded the Xie family army. Although he had the Tiger Tally, most of the troops, apart from the Xie family army, could not be mobilized without the emperor's command. Xie Zhao snorted coldly, yet he was determined. "As long as I become the emperor of Ling country, I will help you take the throne. The Wugua will be under your control." Dan Yunqi, though the crown prince of Wugua, was disabled and had a limp. He was not popular in Wugua, and his ministers had many grievances with him. The remaining princes also eyed his position with malice. Dan Yunqi asked with suspicion, "I want to know why General Xie is so eager to seize power. Are you trying to deceive me?" Xie Zhao was silent for a long time before he spoke. "For the one I love." I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave. In the previous life, Dan Yunqi was ambushed in Ling country, and though he managed to return to Wugua, he unexpectedly died shortly after. Wugua then intentionally stirred up hostilities between the two countries, sending troops across the border, wantonly slaughtering the people of Ling country. Later, I begged my father to return the military power to Xia Shao, and together we went to the battlefield. During those years, he couldn't bear to see innocent people suffer because of war. But this time, he was colluding with the enemy, betraying the country, and planning to provoke a war between Ling and Wugua, indifferent to the lives of the people, all for the sake of Ling Songning. He was no longer the Xia Shao I knew. Now he was a madman beyond saving. I bent down and quietly left, but at the corner, I encountered Ling Songning, who was returning with a tray of vegetarian food. She saw me and immediately opened her mouth to shout. However, unexpectedly, Dan Yanche appeared, knocked her unconscious, and casually caught the food she was about to drop. I withdrew the dagger I had taken from my sleeve and dragged the unconscious Ling Songning to a corner of the wall, putting the tranquilizer powder in her mouth. As long as she swallows the tranquilizer, when she wakes up, she will forget the people and events from the past half hour. She will only feel like she had a nap and remembers nothing. If I could, I wouldn't want to raise any suspicions. In the carriage back to the city, Dan Yanche sat in the main seat, resting with his eyes closed. Seeing that I remained silent, he finally opened his eyes, his expression showing a bit of concern, but more anger. I thought you were clever enough to understand the secret signs I use in Ling Kingdom. I didn't expect you to be so stupid. It seems that the marriage should be called off to avoid causing trouble. Hearing this, I couldn't care less about the usual boundaries between men and women. My hands instinctively reached out and grabbed his arm, urgently saying, "Please, I'm still useful. You want to go back to Wu Kingdom, right? I'm the princess of Ling Kingdom. I can help you return. Just promise me that Wu Kingdom won't go to war with Ling Kingdom within the year. We can use each other." A marriage alliance between the two kingdoms would allow Dan Yanche to return to Wu Kingdom 5 years earlier than expected, without having to wait until he was a certain age. But in the next moment, Dan Yanche's eyes filled with even more intense anger and disbelief. "You want to marry me just to use me?" I was startled by his fury and quickly let go of him, instinctively stepping back. He saw this and seemed to find it amusing, as if his anger turned into a bitter laugh. Every word seemed to burst from his mouth. "Then tell me, how do you plan to use me?" I pursed my lips and eventually spoke my plan. Xia Shao wants to collaborate with the crown prince of Wu Kingdom, making him poison himself in Ling Kingdom and then be rescued by Wu Kingdom, giving them an excuse to start a war. As the general, Xia Shao would naturally gain control of the military and then lead a rebellion. I can find a way to suppress the poison in Dan Yunqi's body, so he can safely return to Wu Kingdom. Once he arrives, the poison would take effect, and he would die, causing a temporary internal conflict among the royal family of Wu Kingdom. As a hostage in another kingdom for 10 years, Dan Yanche would be able to return to Wu Kingdom smoothly, and for a while, the other princes there wouldn't target him. In the confusion, seizing power would be much easier. As long as he promises not to go to war with Ling Kingdom within a year, I will step aside and let him marry a daughter of a Wu Kingdom official to consolidate his power. Then, I can return to Ling Kingdom and live freely as a princess. After listening to my strategy, Dan Yanche's face turned darker. He clenched his teeth and took a deep breath before grinding out through his teeth. "Well, how wonderful. Should I thank you for generously offering to step aside?" I met his inscrutable gaze, hesitant to speak. However, it seemed like he couldn't stay any longer, and with a flick of the curtain, he used his lightness skill and left. Since that encounter, I never saw Dan Yanche again. He began to avoid seeing me. Dan Yunqi came to the palace to pay his respects and specifically requested that I, as a princess from a common background, personally welcome him. Perhaps he wanted to see me, a common-born princess, in a vulnerable position. But I was articulate, maintaining a respectful yet confident attitude. I was not intimidated by his imposing presence, earning the praise of both the emperor and the court officials. During a lantern festival night, I reluctantly took him to enjoy the lanterns. After crossing a bridge, we encountered Xie Xiao, who was paying a merchant. Ling Sangning was holding a lantern in one hand and linking arms with him, smiling. When she saw me, Xie Xiao's expression panicked, and he quickly brushed away her arm. A flash of displeasure passed through Ling Sangning's eyes. I was stunned. I didn't expect to run into them here. I turned to leave, but in my distraction, a passerby bumped into me. Dan Yunqi stepped forward and caught me. Dan Yunqi, who is already fond of women, had been trying to get me to meet him at an inn for the past few days, but I had refused. Now, with the chance to help me, his eyes gleamed with greedy possessiveness. Seeing this, Xie Xiao quickly stepped forward, pulling me aside and giving Dan Yunqi a warning look. "Your Highness, please behave yourself." Dan Yunqi sneered, sarcastically replying before walking toward the lantern stall where Ling Sangning was standing. Xie Xiao turned to take my hand, but I pulled away. He seemed joyful and pulled a jade pendant from his sleeve. "Xiao, do you remember? This was the token you gave me when you saved me. Wait a little longer, and I will make it up to you." I looked at the jade pendant. It was the pendant I had given him when he saved me after an assassination attempt. A life-saving grace that I could never repay. It was the only valuable thing I had at the time. In the previous life, after we married, he said it would serve as a token of our love. I had foolishly believed him. I snatched the pendant from him and threw it on the ground. It shattered with a loud crack. Xie Xiao, with reddened eyes, quickly dropped to the ground, picking up the broken pieces of jade. He held the shattered pieces in his hands and approached me, trying to take my hand again. I stepped back, but in doing so, I accidentally bumped into a warm embrace. Dan Yanche appeared behind me at some point. With a cold expression, he pulled out a handkerchief from his chest pocket and gently held my hand, carefully wiping it clean as though handling some precious treasure. After a long pause, he lifted his gaze to look at the stunned Xie Xiao, speaking harshly. "General Xie, if you lay another hand on my wife before the wedding, you'd better watch out. Your hands might not be so usable one day." Xie Xiao, however, seemed to have lost all sense of reason. He glared fiercely at Dan Yanche, tightly clenching his fists. His hands, cut by the broken jade, bled profusely as he yelled frantically. "Xiao is my wife. She's been married to me for years. Whether in this life or the last, she's mine from start to finish. You, a powerless hostage, have no right to her." Before he could finish, Dan Yanche kicked him, sending him flying. Xie Xiao's lips trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The surrounding crowd of onlookers gathered, seemingly eager for the spectacle. I took a step forward and, with sincerity, addressed Xie Xiao. "General, you must be having a delusion if you think I'd be foolish enough to marry you." I turned back to Dan Yanche, affectionately linking my arm with his, and smiled softly. "Lord Yanche is a man of talent, and I've been infatuated with him since the first sight. Besides, everyone knows you and Ling Sangning are childhood sweethearts, and now you've brought her back into your household. How could I abandon Lord Yanche and become a woman who destroys relationships?" Ignoring the hurt and anguish in Xie Xiao's eyes, I gestured for him to look at something not far off. Ling Sangning had fallen ill. She was weakly leaning against Dan Yunqi, allowing him to touch her freely. Dan Yunqi even picked her up, preparing to leave. The Crown Prince of Wugua seems to care a lot for Ling Sangning. "Perhaps a good marriage is coming soon," I remarked. Seeing the two leave, Xie Xiao glanced at us one last time with reluctance, then hurried after them. In the end, he couldn't let go of Ling Sangning. Once the troublesome people were gone, I thought Dan Yanche was going to escort me back to the palace. But instead, he bought several rabbit-shaped lanterns and led me to the riverbank, where people were sending their lanterns down the water. The river was filled with lanterns floating toward the distance. It was said that if one made a wish while holding a lantern and placed it in the river god would help fulfill the wish. I held my lantern, paused for a moment, and finally broke the silence. "I've already cured the poison on Xie Xiao placed by Dan Yunqi." I've given him a new poison. He'll probably pretend to be poisoned in the borders of Ling country. All you need to do is send someone to knock him out and send him to Wugua. Once he enters Wugua, it won't be long before he succumbs to the poison. The poison is something I made, and no one else can cure it except me. Before I could finish speaking, Dan Yenche's voice, cool and hoarse with a hint of seduction, interrupted. Infatuated with me at first sight? The corner of his lips curled up, and his eyes sparkled with amusement. Should I return the favor with a love at first sight as well? It seemed that, in the midst of my rambling, Dan Yenche hadn't really listened to a word. His intense gaze was fixed on me, and I felt my heart inexplicably race, my cheeks flushing slightly. I tried to avoid his gaze, accidentally noticing a small mole between his brows. It seemed so familiar. I hesitated and asked, "Your Highness, have we met somewhere before? But you're so handsome. If we had met, I shouldn't have no memory of it." I tried to recall, but his expression darkened, and he didn't say a word before standing up and heading back. It was as though I had said something wrong. I quickly followed him, unwilling to let it go, and spoke again. "Have we met a long time ago?" His tone was a mix of anger and sadness. "Think for yourself." Before long, Dan Yunqi was on his way back to Wugua. The night before reaching the border between Ling country and Wugua, he purposely stayed one more night in Ling country. But he still didn't poison himself in Ling country. Dan Yenche's men knocked him out and sent him to Wugua. On the third day after entering Wugua, he succumbed to the poison and died. The news reached Ling country the day before Dan Yenche and I were to be married. On that day, Xie Xiao, unusually, reported an illness and didn't attend the morning court. He kidnapped me and arranged for someone to change me into the wedding gown he had prepared. His gaze was full of naked possession. "Xiao, I love you. I can't stand seeing you marry someone else. You are mine. As long as we drink this ceremonial wine, we'll be husband and wife, and no one can separate us." He forcibly tried to make me drink the wedding wine. Ling Sangning barged in, ignoring everyone's objections. Her eyes, filled with venom, stared at me in my red bridal gown and at Xie Xiao like a poisoned gaze. "Lin Zhiyao, isn't it enough that you've humiliated me and tried to kill me? Now you want to steal Xialing? How shameless can you be?" Xie Xiao shouted at the people outside to take her back to her room. But how could I let him have his way? After a while, sounds of fighting emerged from the room, and several hidden guards quickly stepped in. When Xie Xiao was captured and pinned to the floor, I entered the room with Dan Yenche from outside the door. The hidden guard pretending to be me removed the human skin mask, still in the bridal gown, but with an imposing air, walking behind me. I looked at Xie Xiao in disbelief and smiled. How could I have made myself so easily fall into danger? That was merely a decoy in disguise, just wearing a human skin mask, and Xie Xiao couldn't even recognize it. I walked in front of Ling Sangning and said, "I told you before, if I hear another rumor about me from your mouth, I'll make you feel it firsthand." I raised my hand and called for the guards. "Everything she just said about me, make sure to confirm it." Ling Sangning was roughly grabbed and dragged away. Her eyes were filled with terror, and in a panic, she blurted out, "You can't do this to me. I need to see the crown prince of Wugua. I'm carrying his child. The child in my womb will be the future emperor of Wugua." Xie Xiao looked up in shock, staring at her. He wanted to question her, but the hidden guards pushed him back to the floor. It seemed Ling Sangning still didn't know anything about what was going on in the mansion. I lowered my head and coldly sneered at her. "If you want to see the crown prince of Wugua, I'll send you on your way. He might already be in the underworld right now, and you'll meet him soon enough." Ling Sangning's eyes widened in disbelief, and as she was taken away, she seemed to lose her mind. I waved my hand coldly, signaling, "End it quickly." Inside the room, Xie Xiao was tightly bound. The letter of treason he had sent to the enemy had already been handed to my father. All that awaited him was beheading. When Ling Songning left, her heart-wrenching screams pulled him out of his defeated state. "Xiao, how could you become so unfamiliar, so cruel? You won't even spare a pregnant woman." His eyes held disappointment toward me. How could he be disappointed? What right did he have to be disappointed? I sent Dan Yenche out of the room. Once I confirmed he had left the door, I took out a dagger and ruthlessly stabbed it into Xie Zhao's chest. Blood seeped out of the dagger, quickly staining it bright red. "Xie Zhao, you're really disgusting." I pushed the dagger deeper, and he groaned in pain. "In the past life, you tortured me every day. When you took the blood from my heart, did you ever think I was also pregnant? Didn't you kill your own child with your own hands? Now you accuse me of being cruel." Hearing this, Xie Zhao's pupils dilated, and he leaned toward me. "You've really been reborn. Xiao, why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? You listened to me, I love you. I only realized how much I love you in the end. I know you didn't send anyone to bully Songning. I misunderstood you in the past life. Give me one more chance." He struggled desperately, his eyes filled with despair. I ignored his pain and pressed the dagger further into his chest. "Chance? You're not worthy." I stood up and left. Why bother with someone who's about to die? Behind me, there was a loud thud as Xie Zhao fell to the ground. But I didn't turn back. Outside the door, Dan Yenche stood not far away. He silently took my hand, wordlessly leading me to the carriage. Seeing me immersed in pain, his tone was teasing. Such ruthlessness. Should I be worried that one day I'll be stabbed in the back if I'm not careful? I came to my senses, realizing his words were meant kindly, but I couldn't help but retort. "Then maybe we shouldn't marry? I'll go tell Father Emperor to cancel the wedding." Now that Wugua is in chaos, with the crown prince gone and the struggle for the throne so intense, I'm worried someone might stab me. Dan Yenche pursed his lips. "You're so easily giving up your husband?" He tightly held my hand, speaking seriously. "Those are just a bunch of ants. They won't last long. They're just here to add some amusement for you. Don't worry, in this life, I will protect you completely." His firm words reminded me of a boy I saved a long time ago. Back then, the boy was alone, dressed in fine clothes. He had deep wounds on his body, visible to the bone. I dragged him back to my master's house, asking my master to save him. When I gave him the medicine, he refused to drink, pursing his lips because it was bitter. As he struggled, I watched as the blood oozed from his wounds, crying desperately, afraid that he would die at any moment. He spoke with determination. "I don't want to die. The king of hell can't take me. Stop crying." The person from my memories seemed to merge with the one before me. I stared carefully at the mole between his eyebrows, tentatively asking, "Were we ever acquainted when we were young?" Dan Yenche heard this, lowered his head, and smiled gently, as warm as spring breeze. End.